So I think we might go ahead and get started. It's my great pleasure to be able to welcome you to this conference entitled India Abroad, India Within, a Day with India's Public Intellectuals. My name is Michael Kennedy, and I am the director of the Watson Institute for International Studies. The Watson Institute has served as a base for engaging students and faculty from across Brown University in this distinguished year of India. And I think this conference is an exceptional expression of this engagement. After all, our institute is dedicated to mobilizing knowledge in the engagement of global public goods. And I am delighted to see that our co-sponsor, the Observer Research Foundation, has many of the same goals, missions, and ambitions. Both organizations support new and creative thinking and their translation into policymaking, not only for the short term, but for the long term. Both organizations are committed to strengthening democratic institutions while having foundational concerns around security and development. Both organizations recognize that studying energy politics, forms of religious identification, and financial regulation are critical to understanding how democracy, security, and development might be found. Both organizations are working hard to figure out how global needs and various national interpretations of those needs might fit together. And I hope by the end of the day, the Watson Institute and the Observer Research Foundation will have more than parallel interests, and rather find that increasing and extending dialogue around all of these subjects will be to one another's incredible benefit, as I anticipate they will. But networks of consequence happen only when there are individuals of distinction involved. I'm especially grateful to Ashu Varshney for having organized this on our side, and I appreciate also my colleagues who are moderating sessions, in particular, Nina Tannenwald, Lena Fruzetti, and Timmons Roberts later today. But I especially appreciate what our distinguished guests bring. I'm so glad that Siddharth Varadarajan, Saeed Naqvi, Sunjoy Joshi, and Manishankar Iyer are here, not only as individually distinguished figures in the Indian public sphere, but as well as representatives of this Observer Research Foundation. While today is framed as India Abroad and India Within, a day in which we will consider central issues in India's domestic and international policies, I believe we will see just how much the questions that animate these Indian starting points are in fact starting points as well for the Watson Institute. We will be talking about Afghanistan and Pakistan, two countries whose futures are so critical and so undecided that it would be irresponsible of any organization concerned with international affairs and the world's future not to put them at the center of an agenda. Indeed, the Watson Institute has been engaging Afghanistan, especially in these last years, and will do so even more in the months to come. We are very pleased that we can do this together now with our colleagues from ORF, and I hope even more in the future. We will also be talking about Islam in India today as well. Thanks to the Year of India, we have had quite public conversations about Islam in India already. Indeed, our year began with Lena Fruzetti's film, Songs of a Sorrowful Man, which not only presents the subject, but most appropriately engages us to consider the various lenses through which, and the lives through which, we can explore how Islam figures as a rich and complex cultural tradition and formation that enables all sorts of expression. And because of that richness, it demands more extensive interpretation and engagement by those who wish to understand better the articulation of religion and international affairs, more generally, and of Islam in the world, most particularly. We will be talking about energy and climate issues today as well. One of the Foundation's recent reports concluded that, quote, India's development programs, including climate change and energy security, cannot be fixed with technological solutions, and that a broader and deeper approach that incorporates socio-political interventions is required. I think this doesn't only go for India. In fact, the world's climate change and energy security issues requires just such a deeper approach, and this is one of the things that the Watson Institute is as well quite interested in. In fact, when I think about these issues, I think about how it is that different technological fixes might wind up having very different implications in social and political terms. And we should think about as well how different political, economic, and institutional conditions enable and disable certain kinds of searches for technological solutions. We should not only, for example, be building alternative pipelines, but we should be thinking about the ways in which different rare earth elements, for example, figure in the different green technologies being proposed and where those rare earth elements are located. Finally, while we'll be talking about local governance today in particular, this needs to be put within a larger point. India has sustained democratic institutions in defiance of most generalizing theories of the relationship between economic development and democracy in the world. That means that understanding India goes well beyond respecting and appreciating a great civilization and rapidly growing power in the world. It means that understanding India better has terrific implications for understanding how the world might otherwise be. After all, extending democracy might be better realized by example rather than by force, by advice rather than by imposition. Indian leadership and democracy's extension across the world is clearly central to democratic hopes internationally. And this leads me to one concluding observation about India abroad, India within. To me, this conference and this collaboration between individuals and organizations promises a new way to think about how American universities might collaborate with Indian institutions. When most American universities think about engaging India, they think about how to engage India's terrific array of languages, complex histories, and especially engaging cultural traditions. India within is certainly one of the most important things that makes our lives richer. But India abroad is one of the ways in which the Watson Institute in particular anticipates the future, because it is hard to imagine a world without India's greater influence over time, and it is hard to imagine the Watson Institute succeeding in its mission without more extensive collaboration with India's public intellectuals and terrific foundations. And so I can't imagine a better way to anticipate a future than to anticipate this day's developments. So with that, let me welcome you all and turn it over to Nina Tannenwald, who will take on the first session.
Good morning. I'm Nina Tannenwald, and I'll be moderating our first panel today. It is my pleasure to introduce our first topic and our first speaker. Our first topic is on India abroad, and in this case, India is near abroad. The topic is India and the AfPak strategy. AfPak, of course, refers to Afghanistan and Pakistan, India's regional neighbors. But of course, the AfPak strategy is the name of the U.S. strategy that vis-a-vis this region that was unrolled, as they say in Washington, by the Obama administration in March 2009. So the big unmentioned other in this title is the U.S. and U.S. policy in this region, and undoubtedly toward India as well. So it does involve India's far abroad as well. The AfPak region is obviously a very central issue for international security today. Things in this region have become quite complex in recent weeks as Afghanistan President Hamid Karzai has been pushing is now pushing for a reconciliation plan with at least some of the Taliban, and this has major implications for the interests of regional actors, Pakistan, India, Iran, Russia, and as well as for the United States. India is a major presence in Afghanistan. It's the 5th largest aid donor, with an extensive involvement in infrastructure development and very good relations with the Karzai government. Nevertheless, here in the States, we tend to hear about India's role mainly when Indians in Afghanistan have become the victims of terrorist attacks, as happened most recently on February 26th. So it's a real treat to have with us today someone who can offer a more in-depth perspective on India's role. I'm very pleased to introduce Siddharth Varadarajan, a longtime observer of and writer on India and India foreign policy. He is the chief of bureau and the strategic affairs editor for The Hindu, one of the leading English language newspapers in India. He has an extensive background in journalism, having worked at the Times of India for many years before joining The Hindu in 2004. He has reported from Pakistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, the former Yugoslavia, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Kashmir. He trained as an economist at the London School of Economics and at Columbia University, and taught economics at NYU for 4 years before being lured to the world of journalism, no doubt finding it more exciting than economics. As a political scientist, I can understand why. He is a prize-winning journalist, having been awarded in 2005 the Elizabeth Newfer Memorial Prize from the UN Correspondents Association for Excellence in Print Journalism, and in 2006 a prize from the President of Chile for Excellence in Journalism and promoting India's relationship with Latin America and Chile. In what is no doubt his immense free time, he has edited a book on Gujarat and has written a large number of scholarly articles. And there are a long list of other honors, which will keep us here all morning if I recite them. So without further ado, let me now turn it over to Siddharth.
Thank you very much, Professor Tannenwald. Thank you to Brown and to ORF for inviting me here. India and the AfPak strategy is essentially what I want to speak about. I want to give you an Indian perspective on what the United States and the international community are trying to do to stabilize and pacify Afghanistan. I think an Indian perspective is important because long after the United States leaves the region, India, as one of crucial neighboring countries, will have to deal with the consequences, good or bad, of whatever the United States manages to achieve or does not achieve in the region. Our feeling in India is that despite stepping up to the plate and doing more than our fair share in terms of contributing to the positive developments in Afghanistan, the Indian perspective or Indian voice often gets submerged in international debates. And I'll try to try to correct that perception or that lack of attention being paid to India. It's always dangerous to speak of an Indian perspective on Afghanistan, because that assumes that there are no divisions within the Indian political class or the Indian strategic community. There are, of course, differences on a number of foreign policy issues, but Afghanistan is one of those areas where there has been a convergence of perception from left to right, and within, there are minor differences in terms of what exactly, how India should adjust its strategy, but broadly speaking, within the milieu of a fracturing consensus in India on foreign policy, Afghanistan remains one of those areas where there is actually a remarkable degree of congruence among all different political players and political parties. There will be two broad parts to my talk today. The first, of course, will focus on the situation in Afghanistan itself, how India sees the changing contours of United States policy, a critical evaluation of what has come to be known as the AfPak strategy, although one could argue to what extent is that a coherent strategy or a fixed strategy. It seems to be something that's evolving and evolving fairly rapidly. And the second part of my talk will focus on the India-Pakistan context. Not because I believe it's central to what's happening in Afghanistan, but simply because it's very difficult before an international audience to talk about Afghanistan and the role that Pakistan has ended up playing without introducing some discussion or having some discussion of the India-Pakistan relationship itself. What negative impact does that relationship have? What positive changes could be brought about in the situation within Afghanistan if India and Pakistan were to have a different relationship? That will be the second part of what I have to say. If one were to ask the question, what are Indian interests in Afghanistan? I think the first and foremost, the most important one would have to identify would be the security-centric or security-related concerns. As a country that has suffered the consequences of Taliban rule in Afghanistan, not in as direct a manner or as stunning a manner as the United States, which was the victim of 9/11, a plot that was hatched by terrorists who had taken up sanctuary in Afghanistan. But we have our own experiences of terrorists using Afghanistan as a sanctuary during the Taliban period, either as a staging post for planning and launching attacks within India, or as a destination for a safe exit once they have been involved in acts of terror against India. And the most dramatic of these incidents, of course, was the hijacking of an Indian plane in December 1999, which, after a series of short flights, ends up in Kandahar. And India endures one of its most, I would say, humiliating moments internationally and in the region, when it is forced, the government of the day is forced to release hardened terrorists from its prisons, terrorists who incidentally have gone on to commit terrible crimes against India and the international community. One of the people who was released in that swap in December 1999 was the future assassin of Daniel Pearl, the American Wall Street Journal journalist who was kidnapped and executed in Pakistan in 2002. And of course, the future leader of the, what is the name elude me right now? The Jaish-e-Mohammed, exactly. Future leader of the Jaish-e-Mohammed, who, of course, was released from an Indian prison and vanished into the badlands of Afghanistan, surfaced soon after in Pakistan, and set up one of the deadliest terrorist organizations that has targeted India since then, and has also incidentally turned its sights on the Pakistani state. So India, the primary concern for India is to ensure that you have an Afghanistan which is in peace with its neighbors, does not become a venue or does not provide a sanctuary for terrorists to attack neighboring countries like India. Second primary interest that India has is to push ahead with the integration of Afghanistan within the South Asian political and economic region. Afghanistan is the newest member of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SAARC, and it's a country, it's a member which has fairly limited links, particularly economic, with the wider South Asian region, primarily because its border is with Pakistan, and Pakistan is not very committed to the integration of Afghanistan within South Asia, mainly because it sees India as benefiting from this process of integration. But nevertheless, one of India's abiding interests is to push for the creation of SAARC as an integrated geo-economic space, and within that, Afghanistan has a special role or special place because it can also serve as the gateway for Indian access to Central Asia. So the third important interest is the role of Afghanistan as a country which could afford transit to Central Asia. And linked to that, of course, is the fourth interest, which is of a more long-term nature, which is to use Afghanistan as a as an energy bridge, again, between Central Asia and South Asia. There was a project many years ago proposed, in fact, at a time when the Taliban were ruling Afghanistan, for a pipeline from Turkmenistan to India via Afghanistan and Pakistan, the TAPI pipeline. It still remains very much at the conceptual stage, but as and when the situation in Afghanistan stabilizes, there is no reason why projects of that kind cannot take off. And so these, broadly speaking, are the kind of interests which India really is quite upfront about. We don't regard any of these interests as undercutting anything that the international community is trying to achieve in Afghanistan. We don't believe, quite frankly, that any of these interests necessarily pose a threat to whatever legitimate interest Pakistan has. Just like, since Pakistan shares a border with Afghanistan, obviously the extent of Pakistani engagement and Pakistani interest will be greater than that of India. And I think there is no reluctance within India to accept that fact. As long as Pakistan does not look at Afghanistan as a zero-sum game, where anything that India gains must necessarily come at the expense of Pakistan and vice versa. So by and large, we don't see any contradiction between the espousal of our interests and what the international community is trying to achieve, which is why, despite India's traditional opposition to the presence of quote-unquote big powers in South Asia. This is a region that we have traditionally regarded as our own near abroad. We don't want outside forces to be involved militarily. Despite that, in 2001, India actually welcomed the deployment of American military power against the Taliban, and since then has been broadly supportive of the American military presence. If you speak to pretty much anybody in government today, you will not find, whether in the Defense Ministry or the MEA or any other branch of government, any support for the idea that the Americans should pack up and leave tomorrow. Everybody wants, within government, wants the Americans to finish the job that they have done and to create an independent, neutral, multi-ethnic Afghanistan, which is at peace with all its neighbors and which is not a threat to any country. So this is, broadly speaking, the kind of approach that India favors. And India's engagement is reflected in $1.2 billion worth of projects and development assistance, building of roads, restoration of power lines. India is involved in the building of Afghanistan's new parliament, so on and so forth. So the engagement is there. You have several hundred Indian nationals working in Afghanistan in different capacities, often at great threat to themselves. And this is essentially, and despite the pressure the threat posed by terrorists to Indian nationals in Afghanistan, the government has repeatedly expressed its determination to remain engaged within Afghanistan, to complete all the projects that we have taken up, and to not be cowed down by attacks on Indian nationals within that country. Now, the fact, if India, like many of Afghanistan's, like other important players in the region, Russia and China, to a lesser extent Iran, if all of these countries share a common interest in the defeat of the Taliban and do not see the continuing American presence in Afghanistan as necessarily a negative thing, that does not mean India does not have, or that Indian observers do not have some reservations about the manner in which the United States is conducting its military policy. I think this is an area where within America itself we have a great amount of debate, because as the war enters its 10th year, with no real end to the suffering of its people, and the Marja operations, despite being conducted under the new McChrystal mandate of trying to limit or trying to eliminate civilian casualties, has continued to produce civilian deaths, which, quite apart from the moral problem that one has with such an outcome, is also highly counterproductive, as McChrystal himself noted in 2009 in his report. As Afghan critics themselves have been complaining for some time now, the US strategy in Afghanistan relies too heavily on the overwhelming and often unintelligent use of force. Thus, civilian casualties have been steadily rising, creating an environment in which the Taliban are able to find new bases of support. I was looking at statistics last week, there is a German academic called Mark Herold who has compiled data on civilian casualties as a result of coalition military strikes within Afghanistan. And the civilian kill rate under Obama has actually gone up compared to what was happening in the last couple of years of the Bush administration. So this, I think, is an area of concern, precisely because it creates fodder or creates a situation which the Taliban are able to build upon. In 2009, General McChrystal emphasized the need for a new military approach, and that was linked, of course, on the one hand to a surge in numbers, as well as a change in the kind of application of military force. And his report triggered a debate within Washington on how many troops can the US really afford to send. The compromise was that he got the numbers, pretty much what he wanted, but within the framework of a timetable for withdrawal. So the first, the time when the withdrawal will kick in is 2011. In India, as in pretty much every other capital, Beijing or Moscow, the announcement of a withdrawal date or the setting of 2011 as a target for the beginning of the drawing down, no matter how much it was necessary for Obama to say that, given his domestic political constraints, is seen by us in the region as a huge political blunder. Because this is something which actually the Pakistani military establishment was able to latch onto. The Taliban has latched onto it, because once you have a clear picture in your mind about the kind of end game that Washington is going to be following, you can then fine-tune or hone your strategy. And the Taliban strategy since 2001 has actually been to duck major confrontation and major battles in the expectation that you will live to fight another day. So here, when you have a target date for withdrawal announced, one sees the beginnings of the ducking strategy once again. And on the Pakistani side, a firmer belief in the idea that Pakistan needs to keep alive its strategic assets, which is how they regard the Taliban, for the day when the United States will eventually leave. And I think that this idea of pitching a withdrawal date, even if it was meant purely for domestic consumption, I actually don't believe that the US, and nobody seriously believes in India that the US is going to up and run, but it has had a negative consequence because it has encouraged elements within the Pakistani establishment to continue to make their links or to keep their links with the Taliban. The single biggest weakness, and this comes to the heart of, I think, an emerging fault line between India and the US on Afghanistan, as far as the AfPak strategy is concerned, is the relative under-reliance on strengthening of Afghan national capabilities. Now, I know that McChrystal has spoken about it. I know that building up the ANA, the Afghan National Army, is considered one of the central pillars of the AfPak strategy. But if you look at the numbers, if you look at the financial commitment, the provisioning, the kind of equipment and training that's been envisaged, it's far below what Afghanistan would need, or what the ANA would need, if it were to really stand up to the challenge of dealing with the Taliban by itself, especially in a situation where the US is looking to get out. And I think I can do no better than to quote General Wardak, the Afghan defense minister, who expressed his dissatisfaction last year with the Obama administration's approach towards creating Afghan capabilities. In an interview to the Council on Foreign Relations last year, he said, and I quote, "Based on the experiences of Bosnia and Iraq, what they are suggesting is 20 security forces per 1,000 of population. Because we always had the question of sustainability, we were not thinking that we could go up to 20, not even to 15. We would have been satisfied by somewhere between 13 or 14, something like that, which would come to somewhere around 400,000 soldiers and police combined. The best scenario was 450,000, and the worst was 400,000. I have been saying all along from 2003 that to enable the Afghans in the most economical way to look after their security, a rough calculation, for example, if 17,000 more American troops come, the monthly expenses of the US will be about $3.2 billion a month. So in a year, it will cost about $40 billion. And if the rest of the international community, they spend half of what the US spends, that would take another 60 billion. On the other hand, raising the Afghan army and police to that level will cost somewhere between 16 and 20 billion. So that's less than half the kind of outlay that the US and its allies would have to commit were they to send their own troops. And then if you want to sustain that force, it will cost another $3 billion a year. So only the expenses of 1 year will be equal to having 400,000 troops, equipment and all the facilities and the rest that is required, plus that money for sustainment for 10 more years. Despite the economics of it being apparent, why is it that insufficient attention has been paid to building the ANA? This is a question that many of us have been putting to the Americans and the British. We recently had the opportunity to interact with the British AfPak envoy, Sherrod Cooper-Coles. And his explanation, which doesn't lack merit entirely, is that you simply don't have within Afghanistan a sufficiently large number of educated young men who can staff the army to the level at which General Wardak is talking about. And the British and Americans are right. You don't have, in sheer numbers, you don't have that. But then if you ask the question, well, since 2001, when Afghanistan came under Anglo-American control, if attention had been paid to the rapid creation of educational opportunities, teenagers entering schools in 2001 would now be college level. So the coalition seems to have come to realize the merits of education, the merits of the Afghanizing of counterinsurgency rather late in the day, perhaps really as recently as 4 or 5 years. So there is going to be a problem over the next 4 to 5 years, which is entirely of the coalition's own making, but which has to be bridged somehow through innovative forms of staffing and training. And this is where many in India feel India could have a role to play. India is one of the few non-NATO countries that has been involved in training Afghan security forces, just the police, due mainly to Pakistani sensitivities and the American willingness to give Pakistan a veto over the extent of India's involvement in Afghanistan. Generally, the Indians have been discouraged from playing any role as far as military training is concerned. Now, India itself, if truth be told, was quite happy to limit itself to police training. During the Bush years, for example, when there was clarity in Delhi about the fact that the US commitment to Afghanistan is really one over the long haul, there was a feeling that, well, there's no harm in limiting ourselves to what we're doing, which is police training. Over the last year and a half, when policymakers in India have begun to apprehend a cut-and-run strategy, or certainly an adjustment of the American strategy to more modest goals which seem tailor-made to, in a sense, give Pakistan a larger and larger role in the long term. There has been a greater willingness on the part of India to embrace more comprehensive forms of engagement on the security front. Nobody seriously advocates India sending troops to Afghanistan. In any case, nobody's asking India to do that, and it would be hugely counterproductive. But the Indians are now more than willing, were Karzai to ask, to train actually large numbers of Afghan soldiers in Indian army facilities within India. This is something which, if India were asked to do that, or if Karzai were to ask India to do that, or the coalition were to ask India to do that, I don't think the Indian side would have any major problems in accepting that kind of role, despite all the vulnerability that may lead to. I think that may lead to increasing targeting of India, but of course India and Indian nationals in Afghanistan continue to be some of the most vulnerable targets of terrorist attack anyway. So in a sense, this comes up against what I would consider the primary fault line between India and America as far as the AfPak strategy goes, which is that we believe strengthening the ANA, the Afghan National Army, and doing so rapidly and in a way that would equip the Afghan army to conduct intelligent counterinsurgency. Now, there's a difference. You can, if you look at Indian CI doctrine and compare that to Pakistani or American counterinsurgency doctrine, there's a huge difference. India, for example, just to mention one factor, since the early 50s, when there was some use of air power, often with very, very negative consequences in the Northeast, the Indian counterinsurgency doctrine believes in in the commitment and deployment of ground forces, in the holding of territory, in the importance of building up and sustaining police capabilities, human intelligence capabilities. A lot of the success, now I'm not talking about the long-term cost, because the insurgency within Kashmir over a 20-year period has led to huge tragedies within the valley. And but part of the reason why the security forces today have the upper hand and the dynamics of the conflict within Kashmir have changed has been the ability of India to ensure at every stage of the conflict a civilian counterinsurgency presence in every district, in every region. So you've had the police force, intelligence agencies, human intelligence assets who have been involved and have been as effective, if not more effective, in fighting insurgency than the actual use of military power, and not to speak of air power, which India simply doesn't use. So the training of Afghan army by India, apart from filling the gap in sheer numbers, would also be helpful in terms of doctrine, in terms of effectiveness. But this is something which the Anglo-American alliance leadership today is really very, very reluctant to accept. And in Bob Gates' visit to his last visit to India, he made it a point when he was asked a question to highlight the fact that India's involvement right now on the security front is limited, and India has not said it wants to expand, and we have not asked India to expand its involvement on the security side. So I think this is something which I would flag as a future irritant if the Obama administration follows through in the direction which some people in New Delhi apprehended may be going down. On the political side, I think it's evident that any American military disengagement is likely to be accompanied by attempts to buy peace by striking deals with elements of those currently involved in the Afghan insurgency. Of late, President Barack Obama and his senior advisors have clarified what they mean by seeking to strike deals with extremist elements. There was a lot of loose talk in the early months of the Obama administration, which mercifully has now ended. Over the past few months, considerable confusion had been spread by a meaningless debate over good and bad Taliban. The strategy that has now been unveiled will combine a relentless campaign against Al-Qaeda and Mullah Omar and others who are quote-unquote ideologically committed to extremism, with flexibility towards those who might be induced to surrender their arms in exchange for money or other inducements. But there are two problems with the strategy, even if it has been nuanced or refined from the earlier statement of the problem of good and bad Taliban. And these problems are the following. The first, it's one thing to speak of reconciliation and absorption and integration when you're doing so from a position of strength. And it's another to float these ideas in an insurgency situation where the insurgents believe they actually have the upper hand. So the Taliban and their allies within the Pakistani military establishment look at this debate in American policy circles. They look at the American and British press, and they detect what in England is called a wobble, that the degree of commitment to the fight against the Taliban is shaky, and all you have to do is hold your ground, and the worst will be over. So when they see discussion about integration, reintegration, and so on and so forth, they see this as a further sign of Anglo-American weakness, which is not to say that were the military equation to have been reversed, they would necessarily be willing to accept integration. But today, part of the reason why the Taliban and within Pakistan the military establishment has gotten rather cocky is because they interpret a lot of this language as being as coming from a position of military weakness as far as the coalition is concerned. The second problem with the strategy is exactly what are we talking about? Who are we talking about when we say we will integrate? And I found the most elaborate illustration of this in David Miliband's speech at MIT last week, barely 4 or 5 days ago, where he tried to unveil elements of the new military political strategy that the coalition is following. And he said, and I quote, "Some insurgents are committed to Al-Qaeda's violent extremist agenda. There will never be reconciliation with them. They must be beaten back. But the majority are not. They share conservative Islamic beliefs and, linked to that, strong views about what is a just social order." Now here you see, for the first time, a willingness to conciliate with so-called conservative Islamic beliefs. Now these are not defined. For example, what position is ascribed, what would the attitude be of David Miliband towards somebody who says, I will be willing to lay down my arms and not fight against the government, but I don't believe women have a right to, or girls have the right to education. Is this a conservative Islamic belief that can be accommodated within this framework, or is it something else? So these elements who have conservative Islamic beliefs and linked to that strong views about what is a just social order, their rallying cry is the expulsion of international forces, but they are also motivated by their intense dissatisfaction with the Afghan government and Afghan politics, which they see as corrupt and incompetent. So here again, there's a certain mixing up of categories. So you are imbuing with the same amount of moral legitimacy the complaints that many Afghans have with the shocking failures of governance within Afghanistan, and those who subscribe to quote-unquote conservative beliefs or conservative ideas of what is a just social order. Now, it's clear to any dispassionate observer that some of these elements, quote-unquote, with conservative Islamic beliefs, could consist of people from the Haqqani network, the Hizb Islami of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, and even sections of the Taliban. And the problem really, quite apart from the social consequences of this for Afghan society themselves and for the wider project, not so much of bringing democracy from the outside, but of creating a society which would not pose a threat to its neighbors. And the problem with this is that all of these elements who have quote-unquote conservative beliefs actually what they share is close political and even military proximity to the Pakistani military establishment. And from the Indian point of view, I think it's very hard to argue against the idea that the civil war or the insurgency in Afghanistan can be defeated without some element of political dialogue. There has to be dialogue, there has to be reconciliation. India does it all the time. India has a fairly active record of combining the use of counterinsurgency methods with cooperation, dialogue, discussion. So it's not as if India is averse to the idea, but I think what India fears and what many countries in the neighborhood fear is that under the guise of a process of reconciliation, you are essentially going to create a bigger problem, because you are going to strengthen the hand of the one player in this entire equation who has been causing problems for the last decade, which is the Pakistani military itself. And sure enough, we've seen over the last month the offer made by General Kayani at NATO headquarters and just after the London conference, that if there is any process of reconciliation, we volunteer to serve as a mediatory power, as mediators between the coalition and between NATO on the one hand and the Taliban on the other. And of course, this is a completely self-serving offer, which so far the West thankfully has not accepted. But it's very clear that within the logic of what you're trying to do, a greater involvement of the Pakistani military through this process is likely to be. And I think if we could ensure through a process of reconciliation that you have no proxies, I think this is something that India could accept. Russia, China, other countries that have some reservations with this approach, Iran could work with. After all, there was a time when India used proxies in Afghanistan. During the Taliban period, India, Iran, and Russia funded and supported the Northern Alliance of Ahmad Shah Massoud. And but the fact is that today, these three countries do not function through proxies anymore. Iran, one can still argue exactly what kind of strategies Iran following. But Russia and India today are firm backers of the Karzai government, to the extent to which when Abdullah, who was one of the pillars of the Northern Alliance back in the day, decided to contest against Karzai and came to India for help, India pointedly refused to get involved. So that's the extent to which India has ended its sort of proxy game. But unfortunately, Pakistan today continues to operate through proxies. So I think the Indian approach would be that if there is to be any reconciliation, or if there is to be any negotiated or sort of a political settlement, the concept of a neutral Afghanistan, an Afghanistan whose neutrality is respected by one and all, that does not pose a threat to any of its neighbors and does not allow its territory to be used as a sanctuary, is something that really has to be a non-negotiable. And I saw in Miliband's speech a reference to this concept that the Afghanistan which emerges through this process should be really a country which does not threaten anybody else. But the link between your reconciliation process and ensuring this outcome has often not been thought through carefully enough. Now, to turn to the second half of my talk, the issue really. How much time do I have left?
5 to 10 more minutes.
Fine.
Yeah.
The crucial role of Pakistan is it doesn't need an Indian to come to Brown to remind Americans about how central Pakistan is to this entire problem. The very notion of AfPak captures the essence of the centrality of Pakistan to the denouement in Afghanistan, or the emergence of the Afghan problem. And this is something that actually predates 9/11. It predates, I would say, even the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. One could argue, in fact, that the quest for strategic depth, using Afghanistan as ballast for better focusing Pakistan's capabilities in its confrontation with India, goes back to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and the post-71 in Indo-Pak War. But certainly these ideas get crystallized during the anti-Russian, anti-Soviet jihad and later during Benazir Bhutto and Nasrullah Babar's time, when the Taliban and other such forces are created and supported. But the US has been aware pretty much over the last 4 or 5 years about the kind of double game that elements of the Pakistani establishment engage in, where on the one hand they provide support to many American operations in the border regions and provide logistical support for the Americans to prosecute their war within Afghanistan, but at the same time maintain subterranean links with elements of the Taliban and, of course, more importantly, with the Haqqani network. It is against this backdrop that Barack Obama, the candidate in the presidential race, had promised a new American strategy and had used rather muscular language suggesting a lower tolerance threshold for Pakistani recalcitrance. Specifically, he spoke of the threat of unilateral military action in border areas with Pakistan if the Pakistani army failed to cooperate with the US. The problem with this strategy, of course, was that the expanded use of force, were it ever to come through, would likely generate more civilian casualties. Secondly, it failed to recognize that the solution needed was not one of threatening Pakistan militarily, but of ensuring that a fundamental course correction inside Pakistan was taken by the Pakistani military. And I think it's very clear that today, as president, Mr. Obama has a better understanding of the role of the Pakistani military, but somehow feels limited and constrained by geography and by the ability of the American political process to actually remain engaged. He feels constrained and even more dependent on Pakistan. As president, Mr. Obama wisely stepped back from his military threats, but unfortunately has done very little to push the Pakistani military to make that course correction. Indeed, the problem with Washington's policy towards the AfPak region is that it has combined a politically soft approach towards Pakistan's military and the ISI directorate with a militarily hard approach within Afghanistan, and, I would add, a politically confrontationist stand towards Iran, the only other country that could provide a viable supply route into the landlocked battle zone. The over-reliance on lethal and poorly conceived military force in Afghanistan and the frontier regions has created fertile ground for the Taliban to recruit new fighters. and laxity towards the Pakistani brass has allowed extremists to develop an extensive support infrastructure within Pakistan. If there were any doubts about the Pakistani military's indulgence towards these elements, the interview of the ISI chief, Major General Shuja Pasha, who has just received an extension, to Der Spiegel in December 2008, ought to settle the matter, and I quote, "It is worth listening closely when this is actually Der Spiegel's paraphrasing of their interview. I'll just read what Der Spiegel wrote. It is worth listening closely when the general explains, this is General Shuja Pasha, why he too is unwilling to apprehend the Taliban leadership, even though many claim that Taliban leader Mullah Omar, for example, is in Quetta, a city where Pasha lived until a few years ago. Shouldn't they be allowed to think and say what they please? They believe that jihad is their obligation. Isn't that freedom of opinion?" General Shuja Pasha asks, defending extremist rabble-rousers who are sending more and more Quran school students to Afghanistan to fight in the war there. So the Der Spiegel correspondent was fairly clear that Shuja Pasha, in his interview to her, was providing the ideological justification for the Taliban's line, the Taliban's policy. And until now, despite all this textual evidence and evidence on the ground, Washington has tended to turn a blind eye to these links. Just as the Pakistani military sees value in keeping alive its old jihadi assets, the US military presumably does not want to squander 6 decades of investment it has made in the Pakistani armed forces, which is why the Pentagon and State Department have avoided applying the kind of pressure on Pakistan that Pakistan itself sorely needs in order to rid itself of military control once and for all. Evidence of this is the fact that whenever any American, they pay lip service to the idea that the military should be back in the barracks, that you should have civilian government, the civilians should be in control. But whenever any American leader of any consequence goes to Pakistan, they meet the Pakistani army chief. They never ever meet the Pakistani defense minister. I don't think anybody even remembers his name. So inconsequential is he to the American approach towards Pakistan. And I think this is really a fundamental problem with the AfPak strategy. Now, within this context, how is India evaluating its options? And I think over the last 6 months, one has detected certain crystallization of thought in New Delhi, which is the need to open up other fronts of communication, other fronts of dialogue, in particular with Russia, with China. India has a trilateral dialogue mechanism, and of course discussions with Iran. Superficially, this may look like the revival of the old Northern Alliance kind of politics, but with a crucial difference. All of these countries today are actually more committed and stronger backers of the Karzai government than the United States and Britain might be. In fact, I have always regarded as curious and quite unhelpful the kind of attack which was launched on Karzai in the run-up to the elections, sustained negative media coverage based on information that was leaked out of the White House and State Department, all of which was fine if there was a plan B. You can discredit Karzai if you had a viable candidate that you could then ensure would become president. But it was very clear over the last 2 years that there was no such candidate and no such plan. So if you don't have such a plan, running Karzai down simply amounts to giving more and more ammunition to those who are opposing him through illegitimate means, like the Taliban. And I think what distinguishes the Russian, Indian, Chinese, and even Iranian approach today is a willingness to actually build closer ties with the lawful, recognized government of Afghanistan, which is that of Hamid Karzai. There are limitations, of course, because Karzai himself is embattled. He doesn't have the freedom to maneuver or to make choices that he would like to make. We believe, left to himself, he would very much like to see a greater involvement of India as far as military training is concerned, but that is something that is simply not on the table. But anyway, a greater Indian dialogue with Russia, with China, is something that we notice. This is part of the strategy to prepare yourself for a situation where the Americans may eventually draw down or make compromises that would hurt your own interest. And this is something which India recently recognizes the value of. I mean, when Prime Minister Putin was in Delhi a couple of days ago, they signed a whole bunch of agreements on defense cooperation and nuclear, etc. But the the most important political discussion which took place was between the two of them on Afghanistan. And similarly, We've seen a revival of the Indo-Iranian dialogue on Afghanistan as all of these countries begin to realize that they need to coordinate their strategies better. A second attack that India has been following is to work closely with friends of Pakistan, like China, like Saudi Arabia, to get them to put pressure on the Pakistanis, to recognize the great damage that this strategy of dualism is doing to Pakistan itself. The Pakistanis may like to pretend that you can have a Chinese wall separating the Taliban and Lashkar-e-Taiba and other groups that have still not begun to attack the Pakistani state, and those who are targeting the Pakistani state on a regular basis. But in practice, given the nature of asset sharing, target sharing, ideology, I think Hillary Clinton speaks about a syndicate of terror, and I think that phrase really captures the essence of the kind of connections that you have between different kind of extremist groups within Pakistan. So you can have a situation where the LET, the Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, Sipah-e-Sahaba, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and the Afghan Taliban could be involved, and Al-Qaeda sitting at the apex would be involved in a lot of common ventures, maybe not at the apex level, but certainly at the tactical level. And the Pakistani idea that you can pick and choose, and that there are some good guys who are more amenable to listening to your orders and other guys who don't, I think this is a deeply flawed strategy and something that friends of Pakistan need to put pressure on Islamabad to recognize. In the last 5 minutes that I have, I want to turn to the concluding part of my paper, which is on India and Pakistan directly. Is the India-Pakistan issue, Kashmir, for example, is it the missing link in the AfPak strategy, or is it a red herring? I think this is a debate that has been going on for the last 2 years. It reached a certain high point during the time when Holbrooke was being appointed, and there was a lot of discussion on including Kashmir in Ambassador Richard Holbrooke's mandate. Two of his advisors, Bani Reuben and Ahmed Rashid, for example, strongly pitched that, argued in favor of Kashmir and the India-Pakistan problem being a part of Holbrooke's remit, even if not at the functional level, but certainly at the level of ideas and at the level of thought. There is a superficial attraction that this notion has. The Pakistani establishment repeatedly says we are constrained by what we can do on the western border, in other words, on the Pak-Afghan border. We cannot deploy more forces, we cannot be more active in supporting the American military effort because our primary security threat is from the Indian side. And there is a superficial appeal that this idea has. After all, India and Pakistan have fought 3.5 wars. There have been moments in the last decade when there was danger of another war, when India deployed its troops on the border following a terrorist attack on its parliament, or more recently, after Bombay was targeted by armed terrorists in November 2008. So there is an attraction that, or an appeal that this idea of linkage has. But it's my belief that this is a flawed idea. This linkage is deeply flawed. But I mean, there can be no question that strategic rivalry between India and Pakistan has contributed to instability in Afghanistan. But it would be a mistake to equate the strategies of the two countries. India has done nothing to undermine the coalition efforts in Afghanistan. Indeed, has played an extremely helpful and constructive role by contributing $1.2 billion in assistance. To recap something I said at the beginning of my talk, Indian goals in Afghanistan are really nothing other than to ensure political stability and security, as well as trade, transit, and energy. None of these interests require Afghanistan and Pakistan to sever their links. Rather, the best guarantor of Indian interests, particularly as far as trade and energy and transit are concerned, is really a secure and stable relationship between Islamabad and Kabul. So India certainly does not see the relationship with Afghanistan as a zero-sum game. However, Pakistan has tended to look at things in that way. For India, Afghanistan is the gateway to Central Asia to allow the projection of Indian interests westwards and northwards. For Pakistan, however, Afghanistan provides strategic depth as it focuses its national energies towards confronting India. I will end just by by posing a question, which is on the link on why. Well, I will end by trying to explain why I believe the link with Kashmir and the AfPak issue is deeply flawed. And this very simple answer, which is between 2004 and 2007, 3 years when India and Pakistan had the most active, most sustained engagement and dialogue with Kashmir ever. These two countries, through the back channel, accomplished more in terms of creating a framework for a solution to the Kashmir problem than they had done in the past 6 decades. And the elements of this solution really were to preserve the territorial status quo, because both sides had recognized by then that you cannot alter it by force, but to take measures to make the border or the line of control irrelevant. And this is something which has been written about. It's in the public domain. On the American side, you've had articles written about this. In Pakistan, you've had Khurshid Kasuri, who was Musharraf's foreign minister, talking about it. India has been less vocal about what was accomplished on the back channel, but you have the record out there in terms of Pakistani statements. And curiously, this period, when India and Pakistan made the greatest headway on Kashmir, was also the period when Musharraf actually allowed the Taliban to regroup. So far from India-Pakistan, far from the improvement of relations between India and Pakistan, providing an incentive for Pakistan to cut its links with the Taliban and to wage a more aggressive war against these elements. We actually see Pakistan using the same period to help re-establish the Taliban. It helped Musharraf, of course, and the Pakistani military that the invasion of Iraq had led America to take its eyes off Afghanistan. But nevertheless, the record of the last 5 years tells us that the period of Indo-Pak, the warming of, or the improvement of Indo-Pak relations coincides with the period when the Taliban reestablishes itself with Pakistani assistance. And I think that this should be a clear enough illustration of the fact that today there is no link between what we do on the India-Pak front. Having said that, I think the government of India quite sensibly has decided to call the Pakistani bluff by looking to restart a process of dialogue. I think one of the phrases that I heard a senior Indian official say was that we want to take away the alibi that Pakistan cites. When the Americans tell Pakistan, look, we need you to do more on the Western Front, and Pakistan says, well, we can't because we have tension with India and Pakistan. I think the Indian government has decided to begin a process of engagement in order to take away that alibi. And where this will end up, of course, really depends on the kind of strategic choices that the Pakistani state and the military establishment that controls Pakistan make. Will they make the choice of treating all extremist organizations as posing a combined threat not only to the region and to neighbors, but to the Pakistani state and the Pakistani nation itself? Or are they still going to persist in picking and choosing who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, make deals with who they perceive as good, in the hope that when the Americans leave, these forces could be deployed once again, as they were a decade ago, within Afghanistan and against India? If that is the choice that the Pakistani state makes, we will end up in a situation where America may well have disengaged from the region 5 years from now, but will nevertheless feel compelled once again to come back and deal with unfinished business. I'll stop there. Thank you.